Can you imagine a place where hope goes to die? Where the simple act of breathing becomes a battle? A place where the line between right and wrong blurs into nothingness. Camp Hereford, Texas. October 27th, 1944. 17 hours. The air hung thick and heavy, laden with the scent of damp earth and pine. A chill wind whispered through the barbed wire fences, a constant reminder of confinement. Inside, under the harsh glare of the watchtower spotlights, rows of wooden barracks stood in silent testimony to the thousands of lives temporarily suspended within their walls. German prisoners of war, captured on battlefields across Europe and North Africa, now found themselves in the heart of the American Southwest. Sergeant Miller, a man whose face seemed permanently etched with the weariness of war, patrolled the perimeter. He was a man of routine, of predictable movements, a cog in the well-oiled machine that kept Camp Hereford running. Tonight, however, the routine was about to be shattered. As he rounded the corner of Barracks D, a glint of metal caught his eye. It lay half buried in the dirt, near the edge of the compound fence. Miller knelt, his joints protesting with a familiar ache, and pulled the object free. It was a small, intricately carved wooden box, no bigger than his palm. The wood was dark, almost black, and the carvings depicted scenes that made Miller's blood run cold. Grotesque figures engaged in acts of violence, symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. He opened the box. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, lay a single object, a tarnished silver locket. It was heart-shaped and etched with a delicate floral pattern. Miller hesitated, then flipped it open. Two tiny portraits stared back at him. A young woman with kind eyes and a gentle smile, and a baby, no more than a few months old. The innocence of their faces was a stark contrast to the macabre carvings on the box. A wave of unease washed over Miller. This wasn't just some trinket. This felt wrong. He glanced at the nearby guard tower, the silhouette of the guard, a dark sentinel against the night sky. He tucked the box and locked it into his pocket and continued his patrol, the weight of the discovery heavy in his hand. Back in his small office, Miller laid the box and locked it on his desk. He examined them under the harsh fluorescent light, trying to decipher their meaning. The carvings on the box were unlike anything he'd ever seen. They weren't German, or at least not that he recognized. They looked older, more pagan. The locket offered no immediate clues. The woman and child were beautiful, but their identities were unknown. Miller felt a pang of sympathy for them, whoever they were. How had this box, with its unsettling contents, ended up in a prisoner of war camp in the middle of Texas? He decided to consult with Captain Schmidt, the camp intelligence officer. Schmidt was a sharp, meticulous man, known for his keen eye for detail. Surely, he would be able to shed some light on this strange discovery. Schmidt listened intently as Miller recounted his find, his brow furrowing as he examined the box and locket. He turned the box over and over in his hands, his fingers tracing the grotesque carvings. Interesting, he murmured, more to himself than to Miller. These symbols, they're not familiar. He pulled out a thick book from his shelf. its pages filled with images of occult symbols and ancient runes. He flipped through the pages, his eyes scanning the illustrations. After several minutes, he shook his head. "I can't say I recognize them, but they certainly have a dark feel to them." He turned his attention to the locket. He studied the portraits, his eyes narrowed in concentration. The woman, there's something familiar about her face. I can't quite place it. Schmidt paused, tapping his pen against his desk. "Sergeant, I want you to keep this quiet. Don't mention this to anyone else. I'll make some inquiries, see if I can find out anything about the box and the locket." Miller nodded, a sense of foreboding settling in his stomach. He had a feeling that this was just the beginning of something much bigger, something much darker. Days turned into weeks, and Miller heard nothing from Schmidt. He tried to bring it up, but Schmidt always brushed him off, saying he was still looking into it. Miller could see the unease in Schmidt's eyes, the way he avoided direct eye contact. Something was definitely going on. Meanwhile, strange things began to happen within the camp. Prisoners who were once docile and compliant became agitated and withdrawn. There were whispers of secret meetings, of hushed conversations in the dead of night. Sense of paranoia permeated the air, thick and suffocating. One evening, as Miller was making his rounds, he noticed a group of prisoners huddled together near the mess hall. They were speaking in low voices, their faces obscured by shadows. As he approached, they quickly dispersed, melting back into the darkness. He walked over to the spot where they had been standing and scanned the ground. He spotted something glinting in the moonlight. He picked it up. It was a small piece of paper, folded into a tight square. He unfolded it carefully, his heart pounding in his chest. On the paper, written in a crude hand, was a single word: Raven, Raven. What did it mean? Was it a code name, a signal? He had no idea, but he knew it was connected to the strange events that were unfolding within the camp. He decided to confide in someone he trusted, Nurse Alina Reynolds. Alina was a kind, compassionate woman who had volunteered to work at the camp. She was respected by both the guards and the prisoners, and she had a reputation for being fair and impartial. He met Alina in the camp infirmary after her shift. He showed her the box, the locket, and the piece of paper with the word Raven written on it. Alina listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. She examined the objects, her fingers tracing the carvings on the box. "This is disturbing, Sergeant," she said, her voice low. "I've noticed a change in the prisoners' behavior lately. They seem different, more secretive, more anxious." She paused, her eyes meeting Miller's. "I think something is going on, something we don't understand." She suggested they observe the prisoners more closely, pay attention to their movements, their conversations, their interactions. They agreed to work together to uncover the truth behind the strange events that were plaguing Camp Hereford. Their investigation led them down a rabbit hole of secrets and lies. They discovered hidden messages, coded communications, and clandestine meetings. The prisoners were clearly planning something, but what one night, Miller witnessed a prisoner attempting to escape. The prisoner, a young man named Hans, was scaling the barbed wire fence when he was spotted by a guard. A shot rang out, and Hans fell to the ground, wounded. Miller rushed to the scene, his heart pounding in his chest. He knelt beside Hans, checking for a pulse. Hans was still alive, but barely. Why? Miller asked, his voice strained. Why did you try to escape? Hans looked up at Miller, his eyes filled with pain and fear. He whispered something in German, something Miller couldn't understand. Then he closed his eyes and died. The escape attempt only deepened the mystery. What was Hans running from? What was he trying to escape? Was it just the prison? Or was it something more as Miller and Alina delved deeper into the investigation? They began to uncover a conspiracy that reached far beyond the walls of Camp Hereford. They discovered that some of the prisoners were not who they claimed to be. They were spies, infiltrators, sent to carry out a secret mission. But what was their mission? What were they planning to do? The answers remained elusive, hidden beneath layers of deception and intrigue. Miller felt like he was drowning in a sea of unanswered questions. He was convinced that something terrible was about to happen, but he had no proof, no way to stop it. He was alone, isolated, fighting a battle he didn't understand. Even Captain Schmidt seemed to be in on it. Miller noticed him meeting with certain prisoners in secret, exchanging hushed words and furtive glances. When Miller confronted him, Schmidt denied everything, claiming he was simply trying to maintain order within the camp. But Miller didn't believe him. He knew that Schmidt was lying. He was part of the conspiracy. Somehow, Miller had reached his lowest point. He was surrounded by enemies, both inside and outside the camp. He had no one to trust, no one to turn to. He was on the verge of giving up, of admitting defeat. But then, he remembered the woman and child in the locket. He thought of their innocent faces, their gentle smiles. He couldn't let them down. He had to find out what was going on, to expose the truth, no matter the cost. He decided to make one last effort. He would confront the prisoners, demand answers, force them to reveal their secrets. He knew it was a risky move, but he had nothing to lose. He gathered a group of trusted guards and stormed into Barracks D, the heart of the prisoners' activity. He ordered everyone to stand against the wall, their hands above their heads, scanned the faces, his eyes searching for any sign of guilt or defiance. He spotted a prisoner named Klaus, a burly man with a scarred face and piercing blue eyes. Klaus had been one of the prisoners he had seen huddled near the mess hall. Miller suspected that he was one of the ringleaders of the conspiracy. He grabbed Klaus by the arm and dragged him to the center of the room. "Tell me what's going on," Miller demanded, his voice harsh. "What are you planning?" Klaus stared back at Miller, his face impassive. He didn't say a word. Miller tightened his grip on Klaus's arm, his anger rising. "I know you're up to something. I know you're not who you say you are. Tell me the truth, or I'll make you regret it." Klaus remained silent, his eyes filled with defiance. Miller was about to lose his temper when Alina stepped forward. She approached Klaus, her face calm and composed. "Klaus," she said, her voice gentle, "we know you're afraid, but we can help you. Just tell us what's going on." Klaus looked at Alina, his expression softening slightly. He hesitated for a moment, then spoke, his voice barely a whisper. It's about the experiments. Experiments. What experiments?" Miller's mind raced. What kind of experiments were they talking about, Klaus? explained that some of the prisoners were being subjected to secret medical experiments conducted by a shadowy organization with ties to the Nazi regime. The experiments were designed to test the limits of human endurance, to push the prisoners to the breaking point. Miller was horrified. He couldn't believe that such a thing could be happening right here under his nose. "Who's behind this?" he asked, his voice trembling with anger. "Who's conducting these experiments?" Klaus hesitated again, his eyes darting nervously around the room. He seemed afraid to speak. I can't say," he stammered. "They'll kill me. We'll protect you," Alina said, her voice reassuring. "Just tell us the truth." Klaus took a deep breath and spoke, his voice barely audible. It's the nurses. Some of the nurses. They're not really nurses. They're doctors. And they're working with someone from the outside. The nurses." Miller looked at Alina, his mind reeling. Could it be true? Could the nurses, the people he had trusted, be involved in these horrific experiments? He remembered the woman in the locket, the one he had seen in Captain Schmidt's office. There was something familiar about her face. Could she be one of the nurses? He had to find out. He had to uncover the truth, no matter how painful it might be. He ordered his men to arrest the suspected nurses, to search their quarters, to find any evidence of their involvement in the experiments. As the guards led the nurses away, Miller noticed one of them slipping something into her pocket. He rushed over and grabbed her arm, forcing her to drop the object. It was a diary. A small, leather-bound diary, filled with handwritten notes. Miller snatched the diary and flipped it open, his eyes scanning the pages. The notes were written in German, but he could make out some of the words. Experiments, subjects, results. He flipped to the last page. There, written in a clear, precise hand, was a list of names. And the first name on the list was not a prisoner. It was not a nurse. It was Captain Schmidt. Miller's blood ran cold. Schmidt was involved. He was the one running the experiments. But why? What was he trying to achieve? He had to find out. He had to stop him before it was too late. He turned and ran, his boots pounding against the wooden floor. He had to find Schmidt, to confront him, to bring him to justice. He burst out of the barracks and into the night. The air was cold and still, the only sound the distant howl of a coyote. He scanned the camp, searching for any sign of Schmidt. He spotted him near the guard tower, talking to one of the guards. He ran towards them, his heart pounding in his chest. He was almost there, almost ready to confront Schmidt, when he saw something that made him stop dead in his tracks. Behind the guard tower, hidden in the shadows, was a hole. A dark, gaping hole in the earth, a tunnel. They were digging a tunnel. But where did it lead? Was it an escape route? Or was it something else? Miller approached the tunnel cautiously, his hand reaching for his gun. He peered into the darkness, trying to see where it led. He could see the faint glimmer of light at the other end. He took a deep breath and stepped inside, his heart pounding in his chest. He crawled through the narrow tunnel, his clothes getting dirty, his hands scraping against the rough earth. He followed the light, his senses on high alert. Finally, he reached the end of the tunnel. He emerged into a small, dark room. He looked around, his eyes adjusting to the dim light. He saw shelves filled with jars and bottles, tables covered with instruments and tools. It was a laboratory, a secret laboratory hidden beneath the camp, and in the center of the room, strapped to a metal table, was a figure. A human figure, covered in tubes and wires. Miller approached the table cautiously, his heart pounding in his chest. He peered at the figure, trying to make out its features. And then he saw who it was. It wasn't a prisoner. It wasn't a nurse. It was Alina Reynolds. But she wasn't strapped to the table as a victim. She was the one conducting the experiment. She was the one in charge. She looked up at Miller, her eyes filled with a cold, calculating gaze. A slow smile spread across her lips. "Hello, Sergeant," she said, her voice soft and menacing. "I've been expecting you." Miller stared at her, his mind reeling. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. Alina, the kind, compassionate nurse, was the mastermind behind the experiments. But why? What was she trying to do? He looked around the laboratory, his eyes searching for any clue, any explanation. Saw a chart on the wall, filled with complex diagrams and equations. He studied the chart, his mind racing. He recognized some of the symbols, some of the terms. They were related to genetics. Alina was conducting genetic experiments. She was trying to create something new. But what? What was her goal? He looked back at Alina, his eyes filled with horror. He finally understood what she was planning. She wasn't just experimenting on the prisoners. She was trying to create a new race, a race of super soldiers, genetically engineered to be stronger, faster, and more intelligent than ordinary humans. And she was using the prisoners as her guinea pigs. Miller's blood ran cold. He had to stop her. He had to destroy her laboratory to prevent her from unleashing her creation upon the world. He reached for his gun, his hand trembling. He was about to pull the trigger when Alina spoke, her voice calm and controlled. "Do it, Sergeant," she said. "You don't understand. I'm not doing this for myself. I'm doing this for the good of humanity." Miller hesitated, his finger hovering over the trigger. Could she be telling the truth? Could she really believe that she was doing the right thing? He looked at the figure strapped to the table, at the tubes and wires, at the instruments of torture. He thought of the prisoners, of the suffering they had endured. He knew that he couldn't let her continue. He had to stop her, no matter the cost. He took a deep breath and pulled the trigger. But at the last second, he realized he was wrong. The tunnel didn't just lead to the laboratory. It led somewhere else too. Somewhere much worse. He finally understood where the tunnel led. It wasn't out of the camp. It was under the general's quarters. Did you like it? Leave your comment and tell us if you've ever heard any interesting stories about World War II/content. The air crackled with an unspoken tension that Sergeant Miller felt in his bones. Camp Hereford was a pressure cooker, a place where the defeated ideologies of a fallen empire simmered beneath the surface of American order. He knew the faces of the prisoners, the haunted eyes of men who had seen too much, the defiant glares of those who still clung to a shred of belief in their cause. He tried to see them as human beings, but the war had hardened his heart, turning empathy into a dangerous luxury. Among the thousands of prisoners, one man stood out, a former Luftwaffe pilot named Erich Hartmann, though everyone just called him the Raven. Hartmann was a ghost, a whisper in the wind. He barely spoke, barely ate, and his eyes held a depth of sorrow that seemed to swallow the light. Miller had seen men broken by war, but Hartman was different. He was a shell, his spirit seemingly detached from his physical body. The other prisoners gave him a wide berth, as if afraid of catching whatever darkness clung to him. The routine at Camp Hereford was designed to be monotonous, a soul-crushing cycle of meals, work details, and roll calls. It was a system intended to break the will of the prisoners, to grind them down into submission. But tonight, something felt off. A subtle shift in the atmosphere, a prickling sensation at the back of Miller's neck. It started with the bread. During the evening meal, a prisoner, a young soldier named Gunter, suddenly flew into a rage. He screamed at the top of his lungs, his face contorted with fury, and hurled his tray of food against the wall. The other prisoners recoiled in shock, and the guards rushed to restrain him. It took 4 men to subdue Gunter, his body writhing and thrashing with unnatural strength. As they dragged him away, Gunter continued to scream, his words a jumbled mix of German and English. The raven, the bread, it's poison. Miller watched the scene unfold, a knot of unease tightening in his stomach. Gunter had been a model prisoner, quiet and compliant. What had triggered this outburst? He examined the bread, breaking it apart with his fingers. It looked normal, smelled normal. But something in Gunter's eyes, the sheer terror and conviction in his voice, told Miller that something was deeply wrong. He took a sample of the bread to the camp doctor, a weary man named Dr. Albright. Albright ran a series of tests, but found nothing unusual. "Sergeant, the bread is perfectly safe," he said, his voice laced with exhaustion. The prisoner was likely suffering from a mental breakdown. War does strange things to men. Miller wasn't convinced. He knew that war could break a man's mind, but Gunter's reaction had been too specific, too intense. The reference to the raven bothered him. Was it a delusion? Or was it a clue? He decided to question Gunter himself. But when he arrived at the infirmary, he found the young soldier heavily sedated, his eyes glazed over. Dr. Albright assured Miller that Gunter would be unable to speak for several hours. Miller left the infirmary, his frustration mounting. He felt like he was chasing shadows, grasping at straws. As he walked back to his office, he noticed a group of prisoners gathered near the fence. They were huddled together, speaking in hushed tones. As Miller approached, they quickly scattered, disappearing into the darkness. He walked over to the spot where they had been standing and scanned the ground. He found a small, intricately folded piece of paper. He carefully unfolded it and read the message. "The raven sings at midnight, but where the serpents kiss." The message sent a chill down Miller's spine. It was cryptic, unsettling. What did it mean? Who was the serpent? And what was going to happen at midnight? He knew he had to find out. He spent the next few hours observing the prisoners, trying to decipher their movements, their conversations. He noticed that several of them kept glancing at the guard tower, as if expecting something to happen. He also noticed that Erich Hartmann, the raven, was more agitated than usual. He paced back and forth in his barrack, his eyes darting around nervously. As midnight approached, the tension in the camp reached a fever pitch. Miller stationed extra guards around the perimeter, his senses on high alert. He watched Hartman closely, waiting for him to make a move. As the clock struck midnight, a strange sound echoed through the camp. It was a low, mournful whistle, like the cry of a bird. It came from the direction of the guard tower. Miller looked up and saw Hartman standing on the roof of the barrack, his arms outstretched. He began to sing, his voice clear and haunting. He sang a German folk song, a melody filled with longing and sorrow. As Hartman sang, the other prisoners began to stir. They gathered in the courtyard, their faces turned towards the sky. They listened to Hartman's song, their eyes filled with tears. Miller watched the scene unfold, his heart pounding in his chest. He didn't know what was happening, but he knew it was significant. Suddenly, one of the prisoners collapsed to the ground, writhing in agony. He screamed and convulsed, his body contorted in unnatural positions. Other prisoners began to fall ill, their bodies shaking and trembling. A wave of sickness swept through the camp, turning the courtyard into a scene of chaos and suffering. Miller rushed to the scene, trying to help the stricken prisoners. He called for Dr. Albright, but the doctor was nowhere to be found. Miller felt a sense of panic rising within him. He was losing control, and he didn't know what to do. As he knelt beside one of the dying prisoners, the man grabbed his arm, his eyes filled with terror. "The serpent," he whispered, his voice raspy. "It's in the water, the water." Miller's mind raced. The prisoners drank water from the camp well. Was the water poisoned? He had to find out. He ran towards the well, his heart pounding in his chest. He reached the well and peered inside. The water looked normal, but he couldn't take any chances. Ordered the guards to shut off the water supply and to warn everyone not to drink the water. He took a sample of the water to the laboratory, hoping to find some answers. He ran a series of tests, but found nothing unusual. The water was clean, pure, and safe. He couldn't understand it. The prisoners were sick, dying, and they all claimed that the water was the cause. But the water was perfectly fine. He felt like he was going crazy. He was surrounded by mysteries, by unanswered questions. He was losing his grip on reality. He needed help, someone he could trust. He decided to confide in Nurse Alina Reynolds. Alina was a beacon of hope in the darkness of Camp Hereford. She was kind, compassionate, and dedicated to her work. She treated the prisoners with respect and dignity, and she always went the extra mile to help those in need. Miller trusted her implicitly. He found Alina in the infirmary, tending to the sick prisoners. He told her everything that had happened, from Gunter's outburst to the prisoner's sudden illness. He showed her the message he had found, the one about the raven and the serpent. Alina listened intently, her brow furrowed with concern. She examined the message, her fingers tracing the words. "This is very strange, Sergeant," she said, her voice low. "I've noticed that the prisoners have been acting differently lately. They seem more agitated, more fearful." She told Miller that she had also noticed that some of the nurses were behaving oddly. They were secretive, whispering to each other in corners, and they seemed to be avoiding her. She suspected that they were involved in something, but she didn't know what. Miller and Alina decided to work together to uncover the truth. They began to investigate the nurses. watching their movements, listening to their conversations. They discovered that some of the nurses were meeting with Captain Schmidt in secret. They exchanged hushed words and furtive glances, and they seemed to be plotting something. Miller confronted Schmidt, demanding to know what was going on. Schmidt denied everything, claiming that he was simply trying to maintain order within the camp. But Miller didn't believe him. He knew that Schmidt was lying. As they delved deeper into the investigation, Miller and Alina discovered a hidden network of spies and saboteurs operating within the camp. They were prisoners who had been secretly trained by the Nazi regime to carry out acts of sabotage and espionage. Their mission was to disrupt the American war effort from within. But what was their ultimate goal? What were they planning to do? Miller and Alina had to find out before it was too late. They knew that the fate of Camp Hereford, and perhaps the entire war effort, rested on their shoulders one evening while searching the quarters of one of the suspected nurses. Alina stumbled upon a diary. It was a small, leather-bound book filled with handwritten notes in German. Alina translated the diary and discovered a horrifying truth. The nurses were not just spies and saboteurs. They were also doctors, conducting secret medical experiments on the prisoners. The experiments were designed to test the limits of human endurance. The nurses were injecting the prisoners with various drugs and toxins, pushing them to the brink of death. They were also performing gruesome surgeries, mutilating and dismembering the prisoners in the name of science. Miller was horrified by the revelations in the diary. He couldn't believe that such atrocities were being committed within the walls of Camp Hereford. He vowed to stop the experiments and to bring the perpetrators to justice. He and Alina decided to raid the infirmary, hoping to find evidence of the experiments. They gathered a group of trusted guards and stormed into the infirmary, catching the nurses by surprise. They searched the infirmary from top to bottom, uncovering a hidden laboratory filled with gruesome instruments and jars containing human organs. As they were searching the laboratory, Miller noticed a strange symbol etched into the wall. It was a circle with a serpent coiled around it, the same symbol that had been mentioned in the message about the raven. He recognized it from the wooden box, the one he had found near the fence. He felt like he was finally piecing together the puzzle. He also saw a vial labeled Serpent's Kiss tucked away in a dark corner. It all aligned: the message, the serpent symbol, the experiments. This was it. He ordered the guards to arrest the nurses and to confiscate all the evidence. As the guards were leading the nurses away, one of them turned to Miller and sneered. "You think you've won, Sergeant," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "But you're wrong. We're just getting started." Miller ignored her taunts and focused on the task at hand. He had to find out who was behind the experiments and what their ultimate goal was. He knew that the answers were hidden somewhere within the camp, and he was determined to find them. He decided to interrogate Captain Schmidt, hoping to extract some information from him. He brought Schmidt to his office and questioned him for hours. Schmidt remained defiant, refusing to admit anything. But Miller could see the fear in his eyes. He knew that Schmidt was hiding something. As he was interrogating Schmidt, Miller received a message from one of the guards. The guard had found a secret tunnel hidden beneath the camp. The tunnel led to an underground laboratory where the nurses were conducting their experiments. Miller rushed to the tunnel and followed it to the laboratory. He found a scene of horror and devastation. The laboratory was filled with dead bodies, their bodies mutilated and disfigured. He saw the instruments that the nurses had used to torture and kill the prisoners. He felt a surge of rage and disgust. He also found a map of the camp with a series of markings and symbols. He studied the map carefully, trying to decipher its meaning. He realized that the markings indicated a series of underground tunnels that connected various parts of the camp. The tunnels were being used to transport prisoners to the laboratory, where they were subjected to the experiments. Miller realized that the prisoners were not just being used as guinea pigs. They were also being used as a source of organs and tissues for the experiments. The nurses were trying to create a new race of super soldiers, using the prisoners' organs and tissues. They were injecting the prisoners with various drugs and toxins, trying to enhance their physical and mental abilities. They were also performing genetic experiments, trying to alter the prisoners' DNA. Miller was horrified by the scope and depravity of the experiments. He knew that he had to stop them, no matter the cost. He vowed to destroy the laboratory and to expose the nurses' crimes to the world. He gathered a group of trusted guards and prepared to launch an assault on the laboratory. But as he was preparing the assault, he received a message from a leaner. A leaner had discovered a secret passage that led to the general's quarters. She suspected that the general was involved in the experiments. Miller was shocked by the news. He couldn't believe that the general, the man he had respected and admired, could be involved in such a heinous crime. He decided to investigate Aliner's claim, but as he opened the door, ready to rush to the general's quarters, he froze. It was the general's quarters, but the tunnel didn't stop there. Etched into the wall, barely visible in the dim light, was the serpent symbol. But this wasn't just any serpent. It was an Ouroboros, a serpent eating its own tail. And beneath it, etched in what appeared to